Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we're continuing my top 100 board games of all time. Last time we covered games numbers 100 through 91. Today we're going to be tackling games numbers 90 through 81. Without any further ado, let's get straight to the list. My number 90 board game of all time is Macao, designed by Stefan Feld. This game is just an enjoyable experience. There is some dice rolling, there is some card play. The cards mostly consist of different characters who provide different actions for you based on the amount of cubes that you're able to collect that correspond with the colors on that card. And that's a lot of what this game is about. You're going to be gaining these cubes as the game goes, and basically each player has their own win rows or dial, where as the game progresses, they're going to be rotating it clockwise. And as they do that, they're going to be rolling dice, and they're going to be getting a certain amount of cubes according to the dice that they rolled, the colors that were rolled. They're going to be placed around their win rows, and they have to decide when they want to use those cubes. So for example, right now you might be able to grab 2 blue cubes and be able to do a specific action with it. But if you wait for a future turn, as that dial rotates, you might have more blue cubes and more opportunities to trigger certain actions that are related to the blue color. Really cool, just mapping out all of that, the decision making. And in particular, I really like the acquisition of the different character cards as the game progresses. My number 90 board game of all time, Macao. And now we move on to my number 89 board game of all time, and that is Five Tribes, designed by Bruna Cathala. This is an Arabian-themed game, Mancala style, where players are picking up pieces and moving them alongside the board. And according to the amount of pieces they pick up from a particular spot, that determines how many spaces along the way they're able to move, dropping one piece at a time on each corresponding location. And when you finish at that location, you can grab meeples of the color, all the meeples of the color of the last location you dropped that on. So you could acquire those meeples, and there are 5 different colors of meeples in this game, and each of those colors give you different abilities or scoring opportunities. Not to mention the fact that when you drop in the final space, that final space will also give you an end of turn ability that will be triggered. So when you're factoring in where you want to move and how much you want to move, you also want to consider not only which color meeple you want to acquire, but which end of turn ability you want to trigger. Also, if you can manage to remove all the pieces from a given tile, you will collect that tile, and it will be more victory points for you later on at the end of the game. And each tile is created different. Not only does each tile have a different ability for the end of the turn, but each tile has a different amount of victory points. So some will be more valuable than others. Not to mention the fact that there's a market of cards with different goods that players can acquire throughout the course of the game. And if they are able to collect sets of each of the unique different goods, it cumulatively, exponentially increases the amount of points that they can get. There are also djinns, special characters that you can acquire that will give you abilities throughout the course of the game, but they'll also give you victory points as well. So many different ways, definitely point salad, so many different ways that you can go about it, so many different approaches that you could take as you try to win this game. Really fun, beautiful to look at, enjoyable experience, tactile experience. My number 89 board game of all time, Five Tribes. Now we move on to my number 88 board game of all time, and this is a new game for me, a new game to the list. We had 2 new games in last week's set of 10. This is the first one here for this set of 10. That is Damage Control. And Damage Control is a Marvel-themed game. I am a big Marvel fan, as you could tell by the shirt that I'm wearing. I really enjoy Marvel, the intellectual property, all things Marvel, the comics, the cartoons, the movies, and the board games. And Damage Control is a deck-building game. And deck building is one of my favorite, if not my favorite genre in the board gaming hobby. As a matter of fact, it was the deck building genre that really got me immersed into the hobby and got me to explore all these different styles of game that were outside and beyond deck building. But Damage Control has a unique spin to the deck building experience. I really enjoy the way you build your deck, the way you utilize certain cards. Quite often, cards are being utilized and they're also being gotten rid of. So there are some tough decisions to make where certain cards, if you use them for their ability, they are removed. But I love the thematic feel of it. You're not a superhero in this game. There are superheroes involved, and some of the cards are actual superhero characters who come to help you, and each player can control up to 3 superheroes at a time. But you're actually an employee, a staff member for the damage control company, a subsidiary of Shield that's basically responsible for taking care of the damage that is incurred on New York City every time these superpowered beings engage in battle with one another. And the game starts with most of the cards not on a deck, but instead they are thrown down in the area, the board area, and they represent debris from a battle between superpowered beings. And it's such a cool experience because as you set up the game, each players take turn dropping a card from about 10 inches above the board, and wherever it lands, it lands. And some of these cards, most of these cards are face down, but some of them are face up. So you actually know what's available. You could say that the face-up cards represent your market, if you will. The face-down cards, I guess, can represent your deck. But you cannot acquire a card unless it's face up. And you cannot turn a card face up or interact with it in any way if you cannot see the target symbol that's printed on the back side of the card. So if that target symbol is not 100% visible, if it is partially covered by another card, then you cannot interact with that card at all. But if it is, then you can interact with it. You can trigger actions that flip cards from face down to face up, and then all of a sudden you have options to acquire cards that are face up. Really cool, really neat game. Doesn't take too long, a unique spin on the deck building mechanism, and Marvel themed. My number 88 board game of all time, Damage Control. Now my number 87 board game is not a new one to me. It is Pandemic: The Cure, and this is the dice rolling spin-off of Pandemic. And I'm a big fan of Pandemic. Perhaps it will come up later on the list. I just enjoy the cooperative experience. I enjoy the positive theme of saving the world from sickness, from illness. The unique theme as we're constantly playing all these fiction-based or fantasy-based games, science fiction. Here we are playing something that seems a little bit more like reality. Pandemic: The Cure has the dice rolling element, which typically I'm not a big fan of dice rolling games. Or I should say I'm not a big fan of dice rolling alternatives to card games, because I do prefer cards because they feel like they're a little bit more in your control. Yes, you're dependent on the luck of the draw, but with dice, it feels so random. But it's just so cool, the different ways you can modify your dice and modify your actions based on your particular specialist that you have, your unique character. It's just an enjoyable game. I love how they've been able to turn it from the regular board game to the dice version. My number 87 board game of all time, Pandemic: The Cure. My number 86 board game of all time is Carson City, the card game. Wild West themed game where players are basically growing their area and placing all these different cards and scoring points accordingly. Very akin to its parent game, Carson City, the board game, which I did own Carson City, the board game. It's among the 300 board games that I have gotten rid of in the last 2 years because I just actually enjoy the card game more. It gives me a lot of what I enjoy. There's different special characters that you acquire throughout the course of the game that are going to give you abilities, and they're very thematic according to the Wild West feel of the game. And it's a much smaller, compact experience. It's a smaller box. It's a shorter time. For whatever reason, I decided to stick with Carson City, the card game, and I had to part ways with Carson City, the board game. My number 86 board game of all time, Carson City, the card game. Now we move on to my number 85 board game of all time. This is also a new game to the list, and that is Batman Gotham City Chronicles. Now, this game is a DC-themed game. I'm a big superhero fan. Marvel is by far my favorite brand of superheroes, but I do enjoy DC as well. Maybe not so much their live action films in the last 10 years, but I do enjoy their product, their animated series, their comic books. I've always been a fan of the characters, in particular, Batman. Now, this game does not rank higher because I do enjoy the miniatures. This game comes with tons of miniatures. You've got 2 big boxes you could probably see on my upper left-hand corner over here. And the components are great. There's a bunch of different scenarios that the game comes with, so many characters to choose from, and they have so many abilities. The variable player powers, the difference between one character to another is incredible because they have all these individual special abilities. It's like a pool of like 20 different special abilities. And each individual hero will have like 5 or 6 of these abilities on their card, on their character card. And the composition or the configuration of each of those is going to be different from one to another. Here's the tricky part. It's that each ability does not feel as intuitive as it should. There's a lot of symbols and iconography printed on the character cards. And quite often, because I don't play this game with great frequency, I have to go back to the rule book and check up what a specific ability does. So maybe throughout the 3/4 into the game, we kind of have it memorized already, and we're like, oh, we don't have to check back. But at the beginning of every game, always have to like refresh and brush up on what these individual abilities mean. And that part makes it less enjoyable to me because of that. There's some really good games out there that do suffer because of the extreme iconography to them. And I feel like this is one of those games. But it is an enjoyable experience. And again, the production is excellent. My number 85 board game of all time, Batman Gotham City Chronicles. Now we move on to my number 84 board game. And this one's going to be a bit of an outlier. People are going to wonder what it's doing here. But it's Nefarious. Nefarious is a game designed by Donald X. Vaccarino of Dominion fame. And this game is such a simple game. The box says it's for 10 and older, but honestly, I do find that a child could play. And I have played with my son, who's now 9. I've been playing with it since he was 7. And with my younger niece as well. And it's simple enough for them to play along. They might not figure out all the nuances of the strategies, but it's a silly theme. The mechanics are light, but the variable setup is through the roof. And that's one of the things that Donald X. Vaccarino is known for. It's that he likes his variety. So his games will not play the same from one game to another. So there's always 2 different cards that you choose at the beginning of the game. You randomly decide, and they'll determine changes in scoring, changes in how particular actions are taken or how they benefit the individual players. And based on that, your strategy is going to change because now scoring is a little bit different. Now certain actions are a bit different. So because of that, you got to map out your decisions, factoring those 2 modular cards that were chosen. And there's tons of cards to choose from, and there's even an expansion. So it's a light game. It's not a game that most people enjoy, but I've had a fun time playing it with my kids. And that's a big factor for me. It's how much I've enjoyed it. How much have other people that I play with have enjoyed it. And that's why it's still in my collection, and it's my number 84 game of all time. I feel like I just had to apologize and give my defense for liking my own games. My number 83 board game of all time is Flashpoint Fire Rescue. And this is a cooperative game, very pandemic style. We spoke about Pandemic the Cure earlier. Very pandemic style in nature. Everybody, the group of players are a group of firefighters, all with different particular roles, and they are trying to save a structure, a building, a house from a fire. And there's a lot of expansions that represent different structures and what have you, different scenarios. I've only played the base game. I do own some of the modular or additional boards, expansions, but it's a fun game. It's fine. I do enjoy it. I do like the theme and the difference between that and some other cooperative games I had. I mentioned earlier with a pandemic game that I like the idea of playing something that feels a little bit more real world, right? Not just fantasy and fiction. And I love fantasy and fiction, but playing something that feels like it's real life, right? And it's kind of like a homage to these real life heroes who save us or save others on a daily basis. Really cool game, enjoyable, wondering what will happen if I play it with the expansions. Haven't played it in a while, but for now it's my number 83 board game of all time, Flashpoint. Now we move on to my number 82 board game of all time, and it's Massive Darkness. And for me, I do not have Massive Darkness 2, and I know that there were lots of issues with Massive Darkness 1 that Massive Darkness 2 apparently has fixed. And I know I'm going to get lots of recommendations for looking into Massive Darkness 2, but I'm in the process of cutting back, not adding on. And I already own everything from Massive Darkness 1, so I'm fine with where I'm at. I even have some of the crossover material between Zombicide and Massive Darkness. So content-wise, I'm satisfied. As a matter of fact, it's gonna be, I think it's gonna be the only dungeon crawler on this list, on this entire top 100 list. There would have been more in prior years, but I've gotten rid of a lot of my dungeon crawlers. I've realized that Massive Darkness has a simplicity to it that I could play it with my children. I could play it with other people who don't necessarily play it or other games consistently. Just throw it on the table and it's a pretty easy, smooth experience. It plays very well solo. Lots of dungeon crawlers, or some of the older ones at least, don't play so well solo. I like it. I enjoy it. Right now, it's my placeholder for dungeon crawler games, and that's why it's on my top 100 games as number 82. And now, finally, for the last game for this set of 10, my number 81 board game of all time. It's a classic. It was once more highly ranked, but it's still in my collection, and it still warrants a place on this list. And that is Ticket to Ride, designed by Alan Moon and published by Days of Wonder Games. This game has been in my collection for many, many years. I have many, many expansions for this game. I've played most of them, and it's a fun experience. I've played a lot of Ticket to Ride First Journey in the last couple of years with my son, and that's kind of enhanced my enjoyment for the game, although First Journey is slightly different than the traditional Ticket to Ride games. I did try to introduce my son to Ticket to Ride about a year ago when he was 8, and it didn't go over so well. He did not find the tickets to be as intuitive as they are in the original game, where there's particular points assigned to each ticket, and there's casualties or consequences for not completing them. He didn't really vibe well with that back when he was 8. Now he's 9. Maybe it's worth another go. Even so, I've enjoyed playing this game with a lot of other people. It's a great gateway game to teach to people who don't really play games. I've enjoyed the city versions. I own Ticket to Ride London, Ticket to Ride New York, and these are much smaller, condensed experiences where they're very travel friendly and time consuming, or as far as time goes, is much more efficient. Because that's one thing about Ticket to Ride. It can overstay its welcome, especially with the large player counts. You can be playing a 40, 45, 50-minute game for a game that's relatively light. These Ticket to Ride Londons, Ticket to Ride Amsterdams, New York, they shorten the experience to about 15 minutes. So you could play repeatedly if you want to, and if not, you just play once and move on. Really cool. It has a special place in my heart. Look forward to playing it with my kids. My number 81 board game of all time, Ticket to Ride. And that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for joining us here with Harry Met Board Games. Please comment down below. Tell me what you think about this group of 10. Which games here are among your favorites? Which games you wish were ranked higher? Which games are you appalled by the fact that they're even included on my list? I'm interested in seeing what you guys have to say. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.